Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you enjoy bedtime stories with a touch of mystery. Your support helps this channel grow, and it means I can continue bringing you more stories to drift into the night with. Now, let's begin. My father disappeared in the spring of 1996. I was only 12 years old then, living in a modest red brick house on the outskirts of Sheffield, a quiet city in the north of England. His name was Edward Clark, though most people called him Eddie. He was a lorry driver, known in the neighborhood for his easy laugh and the way he always carried a packet of mints in his shirt pocket. One Sunday morning, he kissed my mother on the cheek, ruffled my hair, and promised he would be back before supper. He never returned. The police searched the roads, the motorways, even the ports, but no trace of him was ever found. My mother, Margaret, held on to hope for years, though her eyes grew dimmer each winter. Eventually, after a decade without answers, she stopped waiting at the window. Life carried on. I grew older, moved to London, became a history teacher. But the hole my father left never truly healed. Every birthday, every Christmas, I caught myself wondering where he had gone. What had happened on that ordinary Sunday in 1996? Then, last week, everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening, the 7th of August, 2025. The rain had been falling over London all day, the kind of soft drizzle that blurs the streetlights and makes the city hum with a muted rhythm. I had just returned from work, dropped my satchel by the hallway, and was pouring myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of my friends knew better than to drop by unannounced, and my neighbors usually texted if they needed something. Still, I padded down the hallway, opened the door, and there he was, my father. He stood on the doorstep, hair thinner and whiter, his shoulders slightly stooped. But his eyes, gray, sharp, almost haunted, were unmistakable. He wore an old brown coat, rain dripping from the collar, and in his hand he clutched a battered leather suitcase. "Hello, son," he said softly, as if no time had passed at all. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind raced between disbelief and recognition. 29 years had passed since the morning he left. My voice broke as I whispered, "Dad?" The smell of rain filled the hallway as he stepped inside, and my heart pounded so loud I thought it might crack my ribs. I wanted to hug him, to scream at him, to ask where he had been all these years. But instead, I stood frozen, watching him set his suitcase down by the door like a man returning from an ordinary trip. He looked older, yes, but not nearly old enough for 3 decades of absence. His hands trembled slightly as he unbuttoned his coat. My mind caught on strange details. His shoes were muddy, the laces frayed, yet the leather suitcase, though weathered, was not something from the 90s. It looked newer, but somehow worn by years of travel. "Where have you been?" I finally managed to ask, my voice raw. He glanced at me, then away, his jaw tightening as though he carried a weight too heavy for words. The clock in the hallway ticked loudly, each second stretching. "That's a long story," he murmured, "and I'm not sure you'll believe me." The silence between us was thick, broken only by the distant hiss of cars passing through the wet streets outside. My hands shook as I poured him tea, the same way he used to make it. 2 sugars, no milk. He smiled faintly when I handed it to him, as if the small detail meant the world. But even as he sipped, his eyes flicked toward the window, scanning the dark street beyond, as though he expected someone, or something, to follow him. And that was when I realized my father hadn't simply come home. He had returned from somewhere. Somewhere that still clung to him like a shadow. The steam from his tea curled upward in slow spirals, disappearing into the dim light of the kitchen. I sat opposite him, my hands still trembling, my eyes fixed on the man who should have been nothing more than a memory. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the occasional patter of rain against the window pane. I didn't know how to begin, how to address the decades of absence that hung between us like a storm cloud. Finally, he set the mug down and leaned back in his chair. His face was pale, the wrinkles around his eyes deeper than I remembered, but there was a peculiar energy about him, something restless, as though he wasn't quite settled even now. "I shouldn't have come," he said, almost to himself. The words sent a chill down my spine. I leaned forward, my voice unsteady. "You disappeared in 1996. Do you have any idea what that did to us? To Mom? To me?" He flinched at the mention of my mother. His eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe grief, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small photograph. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but it was unmistakably a picture of me as a child. I must have been about 10 or 11, holding my bicycle on a bright summer afternoon. "I carried this everywhere," he whispered. "It was the only thing that kept me going." The lump in my throat grew heavier. I wanted to demand answers, to shake him until he told me everything. But the fragile look in his eyes made me hesitate. "Where have you been?" I asked again, softer this time. He hesitated, then glanced toward the window as though checking if someone might be listening. His voice lowered to a whisper. "I can't tell you everything tonight. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" I repeated, my chest tightening. He nodded. "There are people, things I crossed paths with. If they know I'm here, if they know I've come back to you, it won't just be me at risk." The air in the room seemed to thicken. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the glass. And for a moment I thought I heard footsteps on the pavement beyond the front gate. My father's eyes darted toward the sound, and his hand clenched around the mug. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "Were you hiding from someone?" "The police searched for years. They thought you were dead." His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked older then, wearier. "I can't explain everything yet. But I promise you this. I never abandoned you. Not willingly." I stared at him, my heart torn between relief and anger. For nearly 3 decades, I had grown up believing my father had chosen to walk away. Now he was telling me he hadn't. That some unseen force had taken him from us. The kettle on the counter clicked as it cooled, startling me. He glanced at it too, as though even the smallest noise set him on edge. "Dad," I whispered, "you have to tell me something. Anything. Where did you go? Were you in another country?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. It wasn't another country. It was somewhere else. A place you wouldn't believe existed unless you saw it yourself. A shiver ran down my spine. The way he said it wasn't like someone making up a story. It was the voice of a man who had seen something so strange, so far beyond ordinary life, that words couldn't contain it. I opened my mouth to press further, but at that moment, there was a sudden thud outside. Both of us froze. It sounded like something had fallen near the bins by the alley. My father rose to his feet instantly, his chair scraping against the floor, his hand hovering near the door as if ready to bolt. The intensity in his eyes frightened me. "It's nothing," I said quickly, trying to steady my voice. "Probably a fox. There are loads around here." But he didn't relax. He stood by the doorway, tense listening. After a long silence, he turned back to me, his jaw tight. "They've followed me before," he said under his breath. "I wouldn't put it past them now." My heart hammered against my ribs. The room felt colder, the shadows in the corners thicker. I didn't know what he meant, who they were, or why he believed he was being followed, but his fear was real. And if there was one thing I had learned as a teacher of history, it was that truth often hides inside the details of fear. I gestured for him to sit again, though my own hands shook. "That I need to understand. You can't just appear after 29 years and tell me half a story. Please." He sank back into the chair slowly, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of all those years pressed down on him. "There's a village," he began, "somewhere in the Yorkshire Dales. You won't find it on any map. In 1996, I drove through a storm on my way back from Newcastle. I took a road I didn't recognize, thinking it was a shortcut. Instead, I found myself in that village." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "And once you go in, you don't come out. Not until they let you." The clock on the wall ticked louder, every sound magnified in the silence. My mind reeled, torn between disbelief and a growing unease. He was either delusional, or he was telling me something no one else had ever dared to say. I wanted to laugh, to call it impossible, but the haunted look in his eyes silenced me. "That's where I've been," he said, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the photograph again. "For nearly 30 years. Trapped." The words lodged in my chest like a stone. Outside, another gust of rain swept against the window, and I thought again that I heard something move in the street. This time, he didn't look up. He kept his gaze locked on me, as though waiting for me to believe him. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "And now? How did you get out?" His expression darkened. He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "They don't like it when someone escapes." His words echoed in my mind long after he said them. "They don't like it when someone escapes." The way his voice dropped on that sentence made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. For a long moment, I simply stared at him, trying to make sense of what he had revealed. A hidden village in the Yorkshire Dales, a place that didn't exist on maps, a place that held him captive for nearly 30 years. None of it made sense, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't lying. His fear was too raw, too immediate. "Dad," I whispered, "you're saying you were trapped in a village for almost 3 decades. How is that possible? Why didn't anyone find it? Why didn't you run?" He rubbed his temples with both hands, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. "Because it doesn't work like that. You don't just walk out. The roads twist, the paths change. When you think you're leaving, you end up back where you started. And the people there, they don't let you go easily." His words painted a picture in my mind. A place out of time, a village like something pulled from an old folk tale. I had read about forgotten hamlets in the moors, places swallowed by history, abandoned for centuries. But the way he spoke was different. He wasn't describing ruins. He was describing something alive, something still existing, hidden from the world. "What was it like?" I asked, my voice small. He hesitated, glancing once more at the rain-drenched street outside before answering. Quiet. Too quiet. The houses looked normal enough. Stone cottages with slate roofs, smoke curling from the chimneys. But the air never felt right. The days seemed too long, the nights too silent. The people. He stopped, shaking his head. They smiled, they greeted me, they gave me food, but their eyes were wrong. As if they were looking past me, or through me. I shivered, imagining it. A village where time stretched and twisted, where friendly faces masked something hollow underneath. They told me I couldn't leave until it was time, he continued. No matter how many times I tried to walk out, I always ended up back at the same square, the same fountain with the old stone angel in the middle. And every year, more people arrived. Strangers who wandered in by mistake, just like me. Some accepted it, some fought it, but none of them ever got out. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. But you did. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Yes, but not by choice. What do you mean? His gaze drifted away, into some memory he didn't want to revisit. There was a night. The sky turned red, as if the sun was setting though it was midnight. The ground shook. People gathered in the square, chanting words I couldn't understand. And then something opened. A doorway. Not like any doorway you've ever seen. Some went through willingly. Others were pushed. I was one of them. I swallowed, the back of my throat dry. And you ended up here? He nodded slowly. I stumbled out near the edge of the dales. It was August, but when I asked a farmer what year it was, he told me 2025. To me, it felt like no more than a few seasons had passed. But out here, his voice broke, his hands trembling slightly. Out here it's been nearly 30 years. The kitchen seemed to shrink around me. My mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. Time lost, a hidden village, strange rituals, a doorway that spat him back into the world nearly 3 decades too late. And yet, there he was, sitting in front of me. Flesh and blood. My father. The sound of a car passing outside snapped me back. The headlights swept across the window, and I saw him stiffen again, his eyes darting to the street. You don't understand, he said urgently. They don't forget. If they let me out, it's because they wanted to. And if they wanted to, it means something is coming. Something bigger than me. The fear in his eyes was contagious. I found myself lowering my voice, as if someone might overhear. What do you mean? Are they coming after you? He looked at me for a long moment, then whispered. Not just me. You too. The words hit me like a blow. My pulse raced, my thoughts tangled. Why me? What did I have to do with any of this? Before I could ask, there was another noise outside. This time, not a fox rummaging through bins. It was deliberate. Slow footsteps crunching on wet gravel, just beyond the garden gate. We both froze. My father's hand went instinctively to the leather suitcase by the door. His knuckles tightened around the handle. He didn't move to open it, but the gesture was protective, as though something inside was too important to lose. Who is it? I whispered. His eyes didn't leave the window. If it's them, don't make a sound. The rain muffled everything, but I could still hear the faint creak of the gate opening, then closing again. Footsteps on the path leading up to the door. My chest tightened with every step. Then silence. We sat there, the two of us, staring at the door as though it might burst open. My breath came in shallow gasps, the ticking of the clock unbearably loud. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the footsteps retreated, fading back into the night. My father let out a long, shaky breath and slumped into his chair. "They know," he murmured. "They've already found me." I wanted to protest, to say it was just a passerby, maybe a neighbor. But the conviction in his voice, the sheer terror, silenced me. "What do we do?" I asked, my own fear slipping into my voice. He looked at me then, his eyes burning with something fierce. "We stay quiet. We don't tell anyone. And tomorrow," he hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Tomorrow, I'll show you where it all began. The village. You have to see it for yourself." My stomach turned cold. The idea of stepping into the same nightmare that had swallowed him for decades filled me with dread. And yet, part of me knew I had no choice. If I didn't go, I would never truly understand. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the window, set my nerves on edge. I could hear him pacing downstairs, muttering softly to himself, his suitcase always within reach. When dawn broke, pale light spilling across the rain-soaked streets, he was waiting for me at the kitchen table. His coat was buttoned, his face drawn and weary, but his eyes held a grim determination. "Are you ready?" he asked. I wasn't. Not in the slightest. But I nodded anyway. We left the house in silence, the streets of London slowly stirring to life around us. He led the way, his steps purposeful, as though every moment mattered. We boarded a northbound train, the city shrinking behind us as the countryside opened wide. Rolling hills, scattered farms, sheep grazing in misty fields. As we drew closer to the Dales, I could see the tension in him grow. His hands clenched tighter, his eyes scanning the landscape through the train window. Finally, we arrived at a small station, almost deserted. He stepped onto the platform, inhaling the air as though it carried both memory and dread. "This is where it starts," he said quietly. I followed him, my heart heavy, my mind racing. Somewhere ahead, hidden among the hills and valleys of Yorkshire, was the place that had stolen nearly 3 decades of my father's life. And now, it was waiting for me too. The platform was almost empty when we stepped off the train. The morning mist clung low to the ground, curling around the rails and swallowing the distant hills in a pale haze. I pulled my coat tighter around me, though it wasn't the cold that unsettled me. It was the way my father's eyes never seemed to rest, darting from the hedgerows to the waiting taxis to the rusted sign that creaked above the platform. He didn't speak, only motion for me to follow. We left the station and walked through the village that lay just beyond, a place so small and quiet it felt suspended in time. Stone cottages with ivy climbing the walls, chimneys coughing smoke into the damp air, the faint smell of wet earth and sheep carried by the breeze. There were people, yes, but they moved slowly, deliberately, as if the morning had no urgency. Their eyes flicked toward us now and then, but only briefly, as though they knew better than to stare too long. We stopped by a narrow lane where the pavement ended and the fields began. My father adjusted the strap of his leather suitcase and spoke for the first time since leaving London. "From here, it's all on foot. The road doesn't take us where we're going." I glanced at him, searching for some sign of reassurance, but he only pressed forward, stepping off the lane and into the damp grass. I followed reluctantly, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft ground. The path wasn't marked, just a faint line where the earth had been pressed down by feet long gone. As we walked, the land stretched wider, the hills rising higher. The sound of the village faded behind us, replaced by the rustle of wind through the heather and the distant cry of crows circling above. It should have been beautiful. The rolling moors, the scent of wildflowers hidden among the tall grass, but an unease grew heavier with every step. "Dad," I finally said, my breath visible in the cool air. "Are you sure about this? After everything you've been through? Why bring me here?" He didn't stop walking, but his voice carried back to me. "Because they'll come for you regardless. If you're marked, the only way to understand is to see it with your own eyes." "Marked?" I echoed, confused. He didn't answer. We pressed on for what felt like hours. The sun climbed slowly above the hills, but its light did little to chase the mist that clung stubbornly to the ground. My legs ached, my thoughts tangled, but my father never faltered. Every turn, every dip in the land, he seemed to know exactly where to go. At one point, I noticed a set of stones arranged in a rough circle near the crest of a hill. They were weathered, ancient, their surfaces carved with lines too worn to read. My father slowed as we passed them, his face tightening. "That's one of the markers," he said quietly. "The closer we get, the more of them you'll see. They're older than the village itself, older than the maps. Some say they're what keeps the place hidden." I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone silenced me. We moved on, deeper into the folds of the moors. Eventually, the air seemed to change. It wasn't colder, exactly, but thicker, as though every breath was harder to take. The bird song had stopped, leaving only the sound of our footsteps crunching on the uneven ground. Then, without warning, we crested another hill, and there it was, the village. It sat nestled in the valley below, a scattering of stone cottages with smoke rising from their chimneys, just as my father had described. A church steeple rose above the rooftops, its bell silent. At the center, I could just make out the fountain, and though we stood too far to see the details, I thought I could see the faint outline of a figure at its heart. The angel. My breath caught in my throat. There was no road leading in, no signs, no evidence that this place should exist at all. And yet it did, quietly, almost defiantly, surrounded by hills that shielded it from the outside world. My father stood beside me, his face pale. "Do you see now? It looks ordinary, but it isn't. Once you step inside, the village takes hold of you." I swallowed hard, torn between disbelief and the undeniable weight of what I saw. "And you think it's still waiting for you?" He nodded slowly. "For me, for you, for anyone who comes too close." We descended into the valley, the silence pressing heavier with each step. As we drew nearer, I noticed strange details that unsettled me. The smoke rising from the chimneys was too thick, almost black, and it lingered in the air instead of dispersing. The cottages looked old but well kept, as though no time had touched them. And though I could see figures moving in the streets, none of them made a sound. By the time we reached the outskirts, my heart was racing. The first cottage stood just ahead, its door slightly ajar. The smell of burning wood and something sweeter, almost metallic, drifted from within. I glanced at my father, but he kept walking, his jaw set. As we stepped onto the narrow cobbled street, the villagers turned to look at us. Their faces were calm, their smiles polite, but their eyes, my father had been right. Their eyes didn't focus on us, but through us, as though they were looking at something behind or beyond that I couldn't see. A woman carrying a basket paused, inclining her head slightly. "Welcome back, Edward," she said in a voice that was warm but strangely hollow. I froze. They knew his name. After nearly 30 years, they remembered him. My father gave a curt nod, but didn't stop walking. "Keep moving," he murmured under his breath. We passed more villagers, each one pausing in whatever they were doing to watch us. Children stood in a neat line outside the church, their faces blank, their eyes wide and unblinking. An old man tipped his hat as we passed, but his lips never moved from a frozen smile. At last, we reached the square. The fountain rose at its center, the stone angel perched above with wings outstretched. Water trickled from its hands into the basin below, though the sound was strangely muted, as if muffled by the air itself. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't explain, and felt a shiver run through me. The angel's face was eroded by time, but its eyes seemed sharp, almost alive, watching. My father gripped my arm suddenly, pulling me back. "Don't look too long," he warned. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaky. He glanced around the square, his face tense. "Because once it sees you, it never forgets." The weight of his words settled on me like a stone. I tore my gaze away from the angel, though I felt its presence still, like a pressure at the back of my skull. Around us, the villagers continued their silent watching. No one approached, no one spoke, yet the air thrummed with expectation. It felt as though the entire village was waiting, holding its breath. My father's hand tightened on my arm. "We shouldn't stay long. I just needed you to see it, to know it's real. Tomorrow, we leave." But even as he said it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The fountain's trickle grew louder in my ears, the villagers' stares heavier, the sky above dimmer though the day wasn't yet over. And deep inside, I felt it. That same pull he must have felt all those years ago. The village wasn't just watching us. It was waiting. As I sit here tonight, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, I still cannot fully grasp what has happened. My father, gone for nearly 3 decades, has returned, aged, weary but alive. The questions linger, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Where had he truly been? What had kept him from us all those years? And why now, after so much silence, had he chosen to walk back into our lives? There are moments when I catch him staring out of the window, his expression unreadable, as though the weight of untold stories presses against his chest. Sometimes I wonder if I should push him to explain, but then I remember the fragility in his voice, the way his hands tremble when he speaks of the past. Perhaps some truths are too heavy to be spoken aloud. For now, I am left with the simple fact. He is here. My father is home. The years we lost can never be returned, but the days ahead, however many they may be, are ours to share. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. The rest, I leave to time.